Welcome to murky Midcoast, where quiet towns keep loud secrets and dirt roads lead to stories long buried. This is the story of Frank Rudkin, a man whose life ended abruptly in a remote hut. It's a story of tightly knit rural communities. It's a story of passion, betrayal, and justice. On the morning of Tuesday, the 5th of July 1921, 56-year-old Frank Rudkin didn't show up for work. Frank had recently picked up some work with local farmer Mr. W.H. Abbott on his property at Monkerai. Through the week, Frank stayed in a simple hut on Abbott's property. On the weekends, he returned to his wife Jessie and their 4 children at their home in Stratford, which was a settlement around 30 kilometres from Monkerai. When the morning was getting on and there was still no sign of Frank, Robert Galvin, who Frank had been working with, sent his 14-year-old son Raymond to the hut to check on him. Frank had been at Galvin's home until 9 p.m. the night before, and he seemed to have all intentions of being at work the following day. Young Raymond stumbled upon a gruesome scene. The hut was in disarray, bedclothes were scattered around, and Frank's lifeless body was lying in a doorway in a pool of his own blood. It was clear Frank had met with foul play. The authorities were quickly notified, and in the ensuing investigation would soon unearth a salacious tale of jealousy, adultery, control, and revenge. Francis Edwin Rudkin, known as Frank, was the youngest of 7 children. He was born at Stroud, New South Wales on the 21st of October 1864, to his parents Henry and Ellen. Tragically, Frank's father Henry died when young Frank was just 2 months old. Although the day-to-day details of how the family made ends meet are lost to time, scraping out a living in the rural communities of 19th century Australia was challenging as it was, but without their breadwinner, life would have been extremely tough for Ellen and the children. As an adult, Frank acquired 440 acres of property near Stratford through a conditional purchase from the Crown. Under this system, individuals could apply to lease Crown land with the intention to purchase. On the 15th of October, 1902, 39-year-old Frank married the much younger 17-year-old Jessie Towns at Stockton. The 5th child of 12 children, Jessie Towns was born at Monkerai in 1884 to her father, George P. Towns, a gold miner, and his wife Susanna. It's unclear which mine George was working, but several mines were operational in Monkerai during that period, including the Eclipse, Loch Lamonda and Blunderstone mines. With a small population, the community was closely knit. Although the area was relatively isolated, a grocer's cart from Dungog visited weekly with supplies, and local butcher, Mr. Titcomb, sold meat to the residents. After their marriage, Frank and Jessie Rudkin had 4 children together. However, their marriage had its strains. Jessie claimed that Frank had subjected her to physical abuse and had left her unsupported financially. Additionally, rumours circulated about a relationship between 35-year-old Jessie and a 24-year-old neighbour, Charles Griffin. The Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners Advocate described Charles in dress and physique as bearing an appearance similar to many young men of the period. He was over medium height, lean and wiry as the result of an outdoor life. His long face had a patch of suntanned colour on each cheek. The lower jaw was protrusive and the nose aquiline. He had a gold tooth in the upper row of teeth which was conspicuous when he spoke. His eyes were grey with a hazel gleam around the pupil. Charles was born in 1897 at Tullaba near Dungog, to his father Alfred and his mother Phyllis. When Charles was a child, the family left Dungog to farm newly acquired land at Stratford. In his teens and early 20s, Charles gained a dubious reputation. He had a habit of dressing up as a cowboy and riding around on his horse armed with a pistol, and had offences including theft on his record. After young Raymond Galvin's discovery of Frank's body, the crime scene in the hut at Monkerai was attended by Constable C.J. Haman and Government Medical Officer Dr. Reginald Athanasius Fitzherbert. Haman and Fitzherbert found the deceased laying in a pool of blood on his back against the door between the bedroom and the main living area of the hut. The right leg was raised slightly and against the door frame. He was wearing a flannel shirt as night clothes, and blood-spattered garments had been thrown over his lower body. A heavy stick was found next to and slightly under the body, and a spent .38 caliber shell was found a couple of metres away. There appeared to be extensive damage to his scalp, as well as a bullet wound to the face. Fitzherbert estimated the time of death to be 16 to 24 hours before the time of examination, which would put it between 9 p.m. when he was last seen and midnight on Monday the 4th of July. This time frame fitted with reports from neighbours of hearing a thud from the hut on Monday night, and later the clatter of a horse galloping away, although the sound of a horse rider was hardly unusual during this period, as cars were still far from commonplace and most local people still relied on horses for transport. In a pocket of Frank's coat, officers found a handwritten note.
I, the undersigned, will be true to my husband and will not do anything that he, my husband, does not approve of. I will not speak to or go near the one that has caused the trouble, and do stay in my own house unless my husband gives me liberty, and will not go alone. I will also do anything he wishes to make the home happy, and if I break my promise once, I will leave his home at once and will never return to it again without permission from my husband to see my children. I also promise that I will not try for maintenance against my husband if I break these promises. Signed, Jesse Rudkin.
Although the note did not name he who had caused the trouble, fingers were quickly pointed at Charles Griffin. The situation between Frank Rudkin and Charles Griffin was tense to say the least. Things came to a head on the evening of the 13th of June, when there was an altercation between Frank and Charles at the Stratford post office. Charles was purchasing stamps when suddenly Jessie Rudkin arrived at the scene with a stock whip in hand. She confronted Charles, accusing him of spreading rumours about her daughter Lottie. Charles denied having said anything. In response, Jessie struck him with the stock whip, and a struggle for control of the whip broke out between them. During this heated exchange, Frank Rudkin appeared on the veranda. Seeing what was happening, he sprang into the struggle. Charles then let go of the whip, but in the chaos that followed, Charles and Frank fell backwards off the veranda. While on the ground, Charles reportedly kicked Frank and struck him with the butt of the whip. The injuries were serious enough that Frank had to be carried to bed, and a doctor was called to attend to him. The investigation into Rudkin's death was overseen by Superintendent Childs, with local Detective Ferguson and plainclothes Constable Emmett playing key roles and doing a lot of the legwork. Additionally, Detective Sergeant Edward Truscott had been sent from police headquarters in Sydney to support the local constabulary, and renowned Aboriginal tracker Paddy Marsh was brought in from Maitland to assist in gathering evidence. An Aboriginal tracker was an Indigenous person employed to track people, animals, or objects across the landscape, particularly in bushland or remote areas. These trackers were highly skilled in reading subtle signs in the environment, such as footprints, broken branches, and disturbed vegetation, and had been instrumental in tasks like tracking escaped convicts or criminals, finding lost people, locating stolen livestock, and assisting police in law enforcement. On the 7th of July, 2 days After the discovery of Frank's body, Detective Sergeant Ferguson questioned Charles at his parents' property, where he lived. At this meeting, Ferguson informed Charles that the police were investigating the death of Frank Rudkin, who had been found murdered in his hut. Griffin responded with surprise, saying, "Then it's true that he is killed. When I was told yesterday, I would not believe it. I knew you would come looking for me because of a row between us. Poor old sod, I would not hurt a hair of his bloomin' head." Griffin told Ferguson that he had no firearm or ammunition. However, several witnesses had reported that Griffin did indeed own a revolver, which he referred to as the Bulldog. In fact, Postmaster William James even revealed that he had sold Griffin a .38 caliber revolver 12 months earlier for £2. While searching Charles's room, officers found a kit bag containing 2 boxes of revolver ammunition, and in the pocket of a vest hanging by the bed, Constable Emmett found a spent .38 caliber shell and a working pocket watch. Griffin said he had no gun for those bullets and had no idea where they had come from, as he had not used that vest in months. Pocket watches needed to be wound every few days to continue working, so the working pocket watch was a significant piece of evidence, as it proved that it hadn't been that long since Griffin had used that vest. Griffin confirmed that he was still in the clothes he had been wearing on the day Frank Rudkin had been killed. Officers noticed what appeared to be bloodstains on these clothes, to which Griffin said, "If they are bloodstains, I can't account for them." Griffin later claimed that the blood on his clothes came from a nosebleed he'd received while working with cattle. He stated that when putting up the slip rails, he bumped his nose and must have gotten blood on the sleeve of his coat. Ferguson then asked him how he also got blood on the back of his clothes, to which Griffin had no answer. Griffin was detained and taken to Stroud Police Station, where he was formally charged with being in possession of an unregistered firearm, though no direct charge of murder was laid at that stage. After his initial arrest, Charles was held at Stroud Police Station and interviewed by Ferguson and Truscott. Ferguson told Griffin that a statement had been obtained from Mrs. Rudkin, and they wished to ask him some questions. Griffin replied, "Certain things have happened between me and Mrs. Rudkin, but I'm not going to blacken any woman's character. I had permission from Rudkin to have to do with his wife so long as I paid him for it. For the past 3 or 4 years there have been rumours around Stratford that I have been carrying on with Mrs. Rudkin in an immoral way. I do not know who circulated these rumours, but there is no truth in them." The body was taken back to Stroud Police Station, where Fitzherbert was assisted in performing an autopsy by Government Medical Officer Dr. Arthur Palmer. Fitzherbert and Palmer concluded the wounds on Frank's back could have been made by any moderately sharp object, and believed they had occurred while he was either sitting or laying down. In their opinion, the person who caused such wounds would have been standing behind and slightly to the right. The examination also revealed 3 lacerated and fresh wounds on the right eyelid. The main wound on the cheek was blackened, as if the weapon had been used with the muzzle pressed against the cheek, and there was an extensive fracturing of all the bones of the cheek. The bullet was recovered about an inch behind and below the right ear. There was another bullet wound behind the right collarbone, which was also singed as if from the gunpowder of a shot fired at close range. Death was determined to be caused by shock and concussion from the bullet. The evidence suggested a violent struggle and a close-range shooting. Sometime after his initial interrogation, during which he denied any involvement, Charles Griffin had clearly taken time to reflect on his situation. Eventually, he decided to offer what could be described as a partial confession. While in his cell at Stroud Police Station, Griffin admitted to Officer Homan that he was responsible for Rudkin's death and asked to speak with the investigation team. The officers gathered in a room to hear what he had to say. Charles, who struggled with writing, asked Officer Ferguson to write down his statement as he dictated it.
About a fortnight ago, a man named Dave Lurry told me that Rudkin had said if I apologized to him, he would drop the assault case from the fight at the post office. Last Monday night, the 4th of July, at about 8:30, I left home and went to Stratford looking for Rudkin. I was riding my creamy pony. I went to Rudkin's and found no one at home, so I rode onto Monkerai Bridge. It was very dark and misty. I hitched my horse to the fence. I went over to Rudkin's hut and knocked on the back door. Rudkin sang out, "Who is that?" I said, "Griffin." He said, "I am in bed. Open the door and come in." As I was going in, he lit a candle. I went into his room and he was in bed with the candle alongside his bed on an upturned tin. I noticed that there was a stick alongside of him when I walked into the room. I said, "I've come to fix up about the case. You told Lowry that if I apologized, you'd settle it." Rudkin replied, "I think it's fair for you to pay the doctor's bill." I said, "How is that fair when you and your wife started it? You brought that stick to give me a thrashing, and when you tried, you couldn't do it." Rudkin said, "If I couldn't do it then, I'll do it now." With that, he grabbed the stick, jumped out of bed, and went to hit me with it. He hit me across the shoulder, and when he went to hit me with it a second time, I grabbed it, and we got into halts. He pulled the stick away and made another hit at me. I snatched the stick from him and hit him with it 2 or 3 times across the head. I think I may have hit him on the shoulder too. Then we got into holds again, and we tussled for a while. I drew my bulldog revolver and fired 2 or 3 shots, just to bluff him. By then, he was standing in the doorway, still holding the stick, about to strike again. I fired once more, and he fell. He collapsed in the doorway. I ran out of the house and back to my horse. I wasn't sure whether that last shot had hit him. I threw away the empty shells near where my horse was tied up. When I went to Rudkin's hut, I had no intentions of killing him, but just to apologize to him. What I did was in self-defense. I did not mean to do him any harm.
Stroud Courthouse was crowded, and cars lined the main street of the tiny town on the 9th of July, when the inquest into Frank Rudkin's death opened before the district coroner, Mr. F. J. Callow. The inquest was immediately adjourned for 7 days to allow the investigators time to gather and examine evidence. Charles was moved to Maitland Jail to await the new inquest date. The investigators must have been relieved at being granted this extra time, as they were still searching for 2 key pieces of evidence: the spent shells that Charles said he discarded outside the hut, and the .38 caliber revolver thought to be the murder weapon. Griffin claimed he discarded the revolver as he rode for home after leaving Frank's hut, by throwing it down the steep embankment of the road near the village of Wards River. But after days of searching the area Griffin described, the investigators had still not located the weapon. Back at the hut where Rudkin had been killed, another intensive search for evidence had been undertaken. Knowing the importance of the spent bullet shells, investigators enlisted a team of local men to help find this literal needle in a haystack. Armed with rakes, officers and locals scoured a strip of the paddock 150 yards long and 50 yards wide for several days without result, until on the 4th day the shells were found by A.J. Miller. A major breakthrough came in the 11th hour. The day before the new inquest date, Aboriginal tracker Paddy Marsh followed subtle yet fresh horse tracks leading away from the Griffin's home down a bridle path to a grass tree, where the tracks showed a horse had recently been tethered. On searching this area, Marsh and Emmett found the revolver and pouch hidden in a hollow log, covered by a piece of wood. With both the spent shells and the revolver finally recovered, the case against Charles Griffin was rapidly strengthening, just in time for the inquest to resume. The story had drawn widespread press coverage, and the courthouse at Stroud was again packed as the inquest continued on the 15th of July. At the heart of proceedings were Charles Griffin's shifting statements and the tension between Frank and Charles leading up to Frank's death. A large number of witnesses were called to give evidence. Robert Galvin, who worked with Frank, recounted a conversation with Frank where he said that his wife was carrying on with another man, and that he wanted to enlist a private detective to get the proof he needed to divorce her. William James Wright, postmaster of Stratford, confirmed that he had sold Griffin the .38 caliber revolver and pouch found hidden in the hollow log, and also gave a description of the fight at the post office. Dr. Ernest Leslie Morgan, microbiologist, informed the inquest that the blood found on Charles' trousers gave the reaction of human blood. A labourer named Mills, who lived about 150 metres from the hut, testified that on the night of the 4th of July he heard 4 bumps coming from the direction of the hut, and ran outside but could not see anything due to the mist. Charles's father was excused from giving evidence due to his ailing health. Frank's daughters, 15-year-old Charlotte and 18-year-old Janet, painted him as a good father and told of him taking them to dances and kissing them goodbye the last time they saw him on the morning of the 4th of July. Jesse Rudkin's testimony, however, depicted a cruel and abusive husband who tightly controlled the finances of the home. Coroner F.J. Callow concluded the inquest, ruling Frank Rudkin's death was caused by injuries inflicted by Charles Griffin, and Griffin was committed for trial at the Central Court, Sydney, on the 5th of September. 2 months after Frank Rudkin's death, Charles appeared before Sydney Central Court on the charge of murder. Mr. W. Coyle, KC, was Crown Prosecutor, and Mr. Richard Windier, KC, appeared for Griffin. Many of the same witnesses from the inquest were called to give evidence at Griffin's murder trial. The defence argued self-defence, painting a picture of a volatile relationship and a well-meaning confrontation that had turned deadly. Ultimately, the jury was persuaded by this version, and Griffin was convicted of the lesser charge of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 2 years hard labour at Goulburn Jail. Goulburn Jail had a reputation as one of the state's toughest and most secure prisons. It housed violent offenders, bushrangers, and those convicted of serious crimes like murder and armed robbery. This gave it a reputation as a place where only the most dangerous and problematic prisoners were sent. Life moved on for those impacted by the death of Frank Rudkin, including Jesse and Charles. After his release, Charles Griffin returned to Stratford, where he married and built a quiet life with his wife Anne and their 3 children. In 1979, at the age of 82, Charles died of natural causes while staying at a caravan park in Gympie, Queensland. Curiously, Charles was buried in an unmarked grave at the Gympie Cemetery, far from his family, who are laid to rest back in the Stratford and Gloucester area where they lived. It raises the question, had Charles become estranged from those closest to him in his final years? As for Jessie Rudkin, just 2 years after the ordeal, she remarried and became Mrs. Andrews. She moved to Singleton, where by all accounts lived out her days as a respectable member of the local community, until her death in 1951. Jessie is buried in Coffs Harbour, New South Wales. Although Charles and Jessie's lives went in different directions after the events of 1921, they left behind a tale that continues to intrigue and resonate to this day. Until next time, thanks for watching. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.